Hi, thought it was time for another journal entry. I think maybe it's time to get back to telling my story. I know the last time I talked about my life story, I said I'd be back in a few days, and I know it's been a few weeks, so time to get back. I think where I left off, I was going to school in Swan Lake. So I had gone to Salmon Prairie School, the little one-room school, until about the middle of second grade. Mom transferred us to a little one or two-room school in Swan Lake, where I ended up going until the end of sixth grade when I started junior high. Swan Lake was a great little school. We were all basically felt like family. Everybody there. Um, Not a lot of kids. I think probably from first grade to sixth grade, there was maybe 20, 25 kids at the most in the whole school. Uh, for a while, they had the school divided into two classrooms: the older kids and then the younger kids. Loved it. Have some really good memories there. Had some good friendships with the other kids. We didn't have a lot of sleepovers growing up. My mom wasn't really a big fan of sleepovers, which that was okay. I had my sisters. My older sister, I felt like was my best friend forever growing up. She might not have felt the same way, but I loved spending time with her. We would ride bikes. We would play outside. We'd play in the woods. I loved playing in the woods next to our house. So um, I didn't really miss having a lot of sleepovers and things like that. But I had a few, had some good friends. So after that, then I went to junior high in Big Fork, and which was pretty much culture shock because you go from this little one room school to all of a sudden you've got, 50, 60 kids in one grade. So kind of a shock. But I think I should probably circle back a little bit. When I was in grade school, was when my dad had quit drinking. I was probably seven. No, let's see, how old was I? Probably about nine when my mom had given my dad the ultimatum to quit drinking or they were done. As he was an alcoholic, so um, she would, I know, get so angry at him for drinking. So a lot of tension there with that. But Dad then decided, yes, he would quit drinking. So he started going to Al Anon, or not. We started going to Al Anon. He started going to AA. And at one point on his way home from an AA meeting, he had an experience, or I guess you could say an encounter with God, where he decided that he needed God in his life. And he ended up accepting Christ as his Savior, ended up becoming a Christian. And we as a family started going to church. And we started out going to the little Baptist church in Salmon Prairie for a while. The same church where my mom used to take us to vacation Bible school in the summertime when we were little, even before they went to school or even, I guess, identified themselves as Christians. We went to vacation Bible school and I absolutely loved it. Um, I loved the Bible stories. I loved the crafts that we did and the time playing with other kids. It was just a really good, positive experience. Even before the church was built, there was an older missionary couple that would do vacation Bible school in their home. I think their last name was Wise, but I can remember Mrs. Wise would have the felt board with the little cutouts that she would tell the story. There'd be like the shepherds and the little felt image of Jesus and the Joseph in his coat of many colors and Noah's Ark on these felt boards. And I just loved it. I thought it was just great and really something I always looked forward to in the summertime. So when we, as a family, started going to church, it was a good fit for me and just really positive, happy memories around that. So completed completed grade school, going to Swan Lake. At some point during that time too, we had stopped going to the Baptist church and we started going to the church in Swan Lake. Swan Chapel is what it was called. Had the same, I think, good memory, good feel for me growing up. Something very positive. So we attended that church for quite a while, probably until I started high school. But anyway, growing up, I was a timid child. I was not really the best student. My mind always wandered. It was hard to sit still. I was kind of slow to take up reading, to learn how to read. But I remember taking kind of the special ed reading class in grade school, which was was kind of funny. But anyway, by the time I finished school, 6th grade, I was an avid reader. I was slow to learn, but once I picked it up, I loved reading, and I would have my nose in a book all the time. I loved, I guess, living in my little fantasy world. So loved reading. Was never good at math, so I wasn't a good student, but but overall, I liked going to school. I just didn't like doing the schoolwork. Um, so I started school in Big Fork, then in 7th grade. Um, was a completely different world because you went from having all of these kids who were like family to all of a sudden not really knowing anybody. It was not not one of my most happy times once I started 7th grade because you have the acne, you have the bad haircut. I had braces. I just felt like I didn't fit in. And the first probably week of school, I can remember at lunch break just going out and leaning up against the side of one of the buildings, watching all the other kids run around their little friend group and feeling so out of place and so awkward and didn't really know how to make friends because in a one room school everybody just is friends, you know. So this one girl, her name was Daphne, one recess just came bounding up to me all chipper and introduced herself and asked if we wanted to be friends. And so I joined her little friend group of 2 or 3 other girls, and we ended up actually being friends all through high school. So that was good. Bless Daphne's heart. She was definitely um, a very unique, eccentric person, but I loved her. Also, probably around that time, actually, I think it was probably 5th or 6th grade when in the summertime, I started going to Big Sky Bible Camp in the summer. Loved it. The best experience of my whole life. I just looked forward to going to camp in the summer. Made so many good friends, and it was actually would have been let's see, how old was I? 13, I suppose. I ended up meeting my husband, we struck up a really good friendship. We wrote letters back and forth all through high school. He came and spent my 16th birthday with me. But I mean, so life took a big detour from there. But we did actually meet at camp. So of course that makes me have a really special place in my heart for camp. But and I know I'm all over the place. I'm rambling today, but that's okay. Sometimes life stories are just kind of complicated. But anyway, my dad, so he had this kind of spiritual encounter, and like I said, he accepted Christ, became a Christian. We started going to church regularly as a family, but somehow along the lines, as I was in high school, he kind of went off the rails religiously. And as I tell this story, I don't want it to come across um, so negatively against my parents, because I love my parents. They were very kind, loving people. They were good neighbors. And I have a lot of love and respect for them. But um, during my high school years, they made some choices that actually ended up being the catalyst that started my development of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it would have started with my dad. I remember him saying that God had told him that he wouldn't be taught by man, that he would be taught by God alone. But which is really strange, because he also at that time ended up somehow getting fed some false teaching. And I don't know from where, but he ended up kind of getting involved in a religious sect that I think was called the Christian Identity Movement. Definitely a false teaching. It led to him having some anti-Semitic beliefs, some white supremacist beliefs. He also believed that, like, we were living in the end times. So all through high school, we had this constant fear that we were living in the end times, and that the government was bad. Law enforcement was bad. He had stopped paying his income taxes altogether, with the rationale that he didn't want his tax dollars going to support abortion, which sounds noble on the outside, but it was a really, really poor choice on his part. He stopped using his driver's license. He stopped renewing his driver's license, stopped renewing vehicle registrations. It was a very, very bad time to be growing up as a teenager, really, with this, where you're already struggling to fit in school. Very, very rough time for me. Some good memories, of course, but a lot of negative feelings around that. Yeah, so this kind of like was a catalyst for some other uh, a very bad period of my life that kind of led into it. I ended up graduating from high school. And when I graduated, I did not have a social security number. And so you can't just go get a job. So I ended up living at home, having no ability to get a job because I had no social security number. Oddly, nobody taught me how to drive a car. I had driven a few times with my parents. They had driven with me a few times, but not really taught me how to drive. I didn't have a driver's license. Like I said, no social security number. So the only jobs I could have would be things that were close to home and for cash. It was very difficult being 18, 19 years old, and that's what you have. Plus these very negative political beliefs and religious beliefs. My dad had completely quit going to church and decided that we would have home church, and so he was leading us in a Bible study at home. Ended up joining with another family and having Bible studies with them in our home. This is home church. Loved the other family. They had some kids that they were younger than I was, but it was still nice to have the camaraderie. Well, let's see, where can I go with this story? Because it's hard for me to recall, because one of the symptoms of having this, complex post-traumatic stress disorder is that my memory loss. I have kind of memory loss, so I have these like bits and pieces of story that kind of like comes back to me. But um, when I was 19, I wanted to have a car because I thought, okay, so I need to have some way to have independence. I need some way to be able to move forward in my life. I found a car in the newspaper, listed in the newspaper, that was something I looked like I could afford with the cash, and I had some silver that I could cash out. I My dad went with me to go look at this car, a little Chevy Citation car. I ended up buying it. He drove it home for me because it was a stick shift, and I had not really had much experience driving a stick shift car. And I remember getting it home. I actually taught myself how to drive a stick shift because um, I remember getting in the car with my sister Angie. She was younger, and I thought, well, we're going to go test drive this car. We're going to learn how to drive this car. I I must have slipped the clutch. I don't know how many times, stalled this car multiple times. And I remember my dad standing out in the driveway watching me. And for the life of me, I cannot fathom why he didn't get in the car and help me, figure out how to do this. But he didn't. He just watched me. Well, finally, I was able to get the car going, and Angie and I went for a drive, and I spent the afternoon learning how to use the clutch and how to drive. It was a rural area, so I didn't really have to worry about other traffic and stuff, but learned how to drive this car. And then I realized I needed to learn how to drive in town because I had never driven in town. So one day I decided I was going to drive this car to Kalispell, and I was going to teach myself how to drive in town. And I just kind of am in shock that my parents had not noticed that I didn't know how to do these things. And because at the time they were so wrapped up in these political and religious things that they had going on in their lives. And like I said, they're good people. Um they weren't abusive. They didn't hit us. They didn't yell and scream. They were actually loving people who were extremely misguided. But I took this car to town, and I drove around town until I had it figured out. And I had so many traffic violations, and I am so grateful to God that he must have had the highway patrol and the police department turning the other way as I'm driving around, because I know I ran red lights. I had near misses, but I taught myself how to drive this car in town. Absolutely ridiculous. But Oh, and to add on the fact that I had no driver's license, this car had no registration. It was just, holy cow. But I did it. I overcame that huge obstacle, and that ended up being kind of the the next few years. I must have operated my life by the seat of my pants. I don't know how I did it, really, with looking back. But it was still, I was not able to have a job. I wasn't, because, my hands were tied. And this constant thing with my dad of we're living in the end times, and we're going to be going through the tribulation. We're um, these religious beliefs that were so out of whack. And what's funny is because I had such a strong connection to the churches that we had gone to Big Sky Bible Camp, I knew a different belief system that was at odds with what my dad was saying. And so, you're torn, but because they were my parents, I believed everything that they said, um, and I was really in conflict because it wasn't lining up with the teaching that I was being taught in, like, say, Swan Chapel. We went to Big Fork Chapel for a while, and it wasn't lining up with what I was being taught at Big Sky Bible Camp. But I, really, I think, wanted so much to please my parents. I so much trusted them that I, kind of fell into the same um, bizarre belief system that they did, but it never felt right to me. Never ever felt right to me. But you go along with it because it's what you know, and it's what the rest of your family does. So Dad hadn't paid his income tax for years, and it ended up then being he ended up being taken to court for this. So he was having this court battle with the IRS. They were wanting to I guess attach our home to pay his back taxes. And yeah, so he was embroiled in that, and ended up getting involved with some political groups. So it was pretty very tense, very anxiety ridden time for me. And it was really, I guess, during that time, probably about the time I was 15, 16, when I started kind of developing anxiety, like a bad anxiety that was, anytime I would be under stress, I would throw up. So that was kind of the beginning of my, I guess, high anxiety and lack of me being able to cope with my anxiety, um, and stress. It ended up taking a toll on me. But I guess I was 19, and I ended up meeting a man who was a friend of my family's. He was a couple of years older than me, and my parents were friends with his parents. So we ended up meeting, um, and I ultimately ended up marrying him. We ended up eloping and getting married after I had known him for 3 months. Um, I thought at the time that I ended up marrying him, I remember thinking that I didn't love him. I wasn't in love with him. I knew that, but I thought this was my only chance to have any kind of life of my own, is if I get married. And I wanted to have children. I wanted to have a garden. I wanted to have, the chickens, and I wanted to be a wife and a mother. And I thought, this is my only chance. I'm just going to have to marry this guy. So Jeff and I got married, and um, At the time that we got married, I thought he was somebody that he wasn't. I had asked him, I guess we had probably only been married a couple of weeks, and I said, do you want to go to church? Because I wanted to go to church. And he said, of course not. That's just ridiculous. I only told you I was a Christian so that you would marry me. I don't do the church thing. He ended up, his belief systems was more on the lines of, it was very new age. I don't even know that he had a set religious belief, but he believed kind of in, manifestation, that, he had this book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull that was kind of his, it, it, it was a story about a seagull who, I don't know if you remember, I remember reading the book, but it was more like a kid's book. But anyway, he based his belief system on this book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. But it ended up being a nightmare, a literal nightmare. The next 6 years that I was married to him, it's going to actually have to be another story, because I can't even put into words what it was that I went through in that 6 years. But that's hell on earth, really. So that's where I'm going to leave off this journal entry, and I'm going to pick it up again. I don't know if I have the mental energy. I will later today. If not, it's going to have to wait for another day. But that's all I got for now.